All right, thank you for the time. Really appreciate the opportunity here. We're going to talk today about enterprise data products. My name is Colin Taggart. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a brief background on my history, on my experience. Got a little over 15 years experience in the data and reporting space, really primarily focused on the BI and the self-service BI space, not only implementing and designing dashboards and reports for end users at scale, but also the underlying data needed to organize it and to make sure it's scalable and efficient and optimized. I've worked in a lot of different industries, from digital print and media to the casino space, a couple years in insurance, and most recently, I am now technical product manager for John Deere at their Intelligent Solutions Group, where I help them organize their precision ag data. So, at a high level, what we're going to cover today is really kind of the concepts of data products, really just level set on some definitions. Won't dive into really super detailed on anything that you can search online. The goal here today is to really talk about just my experience of what I've seen in the industry, where it's evolved, what the work that's been happening in the past while we're calling it data products today with the product mindset, and then how to integrate those data products with your end user consumption platforms, right? Like not forgetting that last mile. And as we go through, I'll give some examples of what I've seen, work, some of the challenges, and at the end, really dive into a little bit some considerations as you're going along in your journey, whether you're new to the concept of data products, you're midway through, or you're pretty mature along in your journey. So just a level set, again, you can internet search, find a ton of definitions of what a data product is at the highest level, not to oversimplify it, but it's really just taking the product mindset and applying it to your data. As a company, as an industry, you have products today. You have product teams that design and develop and deliver them to your customers. Data should not be any different. Apply the same mindset and the same deliverables to your data as you would any other product. And this kind of leads to, again, why we call it a data product, right? A product. Same mindset that you have today with your existing products and your same deliverables. As a company, whether you've been around for a year, 5, 10, 100, you probably have a lot of data and you're probably already doing these things. So not to oversimplify it, but it's just taking your existing data and your existing body of work and taking that product mindset and approach to it. And why is that beneficial? Because your data now has a team that prioritizes the value. Like your data has teams today. You have engineers, you have architects, you have developers. So it's not like you're not doing anything with your data today. But if you take that product mindset, you're telling your teams, look, this is just as important to us as the products that we deliver to our customers. Everyone, you hear the phrase data is new oil, it's new currency. So by doing this, it's part of the conversation from the beginning. When you create a product, when you design a new product, you have data being part of the conversation in the front line as opposed to in the end. I've seen a ton of times where you have products go to market, get out there, and then people want to track. People want to have KPIs on it. Well, if you don't have that conversation in the beginning, sometimes that can get lost until the end. And then what happens is you have to start adding in these aftermarket or scatter around to try to make retroactive fits. Whereas if you would have done that from the get-go, you start getting alignment not only on the data that you need, but also that the KPIs that you want to monitor as you go through the product lifecycle. And this way you can have clear ownership as to who owns the data. And when we talk about from a data standpoint, the ownership is kind of a fungible term. Think of it more as who is responsible for the success of that data, the success of the outcome that that data provides. And we'll get into different kinds of data products and what they can be. At a very high level, kind of what goes into a data product, we can spend the entire time talking about this. But at a very high level, just like any other product, you want to kind of have a defined boundary of ownership. Who is responsible for what pieces of data? Data can be a lot of cross integration. There's a lot of gray area to it. So the more you can define who's responsible for this data area versus who's responsible for that data area, make things a lot more clear, not only for an ownership of the data teams, but also for a responsible and lineage and clear of sight for the downstream consumers to know who to reach out to if they have questions or concerns. Within a product too, we want to have a consistent thing, bunch of different terms. The one I use is called a domain, where it's the container, it's the infrastructure, it's that where you hold the data, keeping that consistent, providing that to your product team so that way they can focus on the data. It's not just the data itself, it's not the database itself, but it's the infrastructure, the automation, the security, and the governance all wrapped around your data product. It also wants to conform to your existing integration, right? We're not reinventing the wheel here. You're doing a lot of this today, so there's no need to revisit it unless you feel the need to have alignment across your products when it comes to integration, which kind of leads into the foundational models. And when I mean foundational models, I mean the foundational data models, how you're designing the data. So when you have things that need to be integrated downstream, having that organization of how you design and join your data together across your products makes things so much easier from a lineage and consumption standpoint downstream. There's a bunch of different product definitions. There's a bunch of different ways you can organize and categorize. For our talk today, we're going to have just really three main categories: the source product, the derived product, and the consumer product. At the highest level, you have a source aligned product. Really, all the source line product is saying is your company today has applications, has software, has manufacturing lines, has systems that collect data that you want to consume. So from a source standpoint, what we're saying is I want to create a product that has just that information off of that source system, application, whatever. And that team is responsible for the success of that data, organizing it. They know it better than anyone else. So empower them to define the rules and to design it in a way that the end users need for consumption. So when an end user comes in and says, hey, I need to have information about maybe the product and the sales of it, and that's coming from two different applications, they can reach out to the relevant source teams and they don't have to worry how to blend the data because the source teams have done it already with all the business rules, get it to consumption. Now, from a derived standpoint, we call it derived or for analytics. This is really just putting ownership around your KPIs, putting ownership around your custom corporate groupings, right? Your sales territories, your sales teams. You have unique ways that you need to organize your data, and you want to be able to have a consistent framework around that. So when people consume it, it's got the same rules, the same output, the same calculation across. And when things need evolving or questions, you have a dedicated team who is responsible for that. Because as we all know, end users, for consumers, they want more than just the source data, right? They want to be able to combine the source data with the KPIs and with their derived assets. And when we talk an integration standpoint, mentioned earlier, integrating as much upstream as possible and really highlighting just integrating just enough to keep moving forward. Long past are the days of trying to create this monolithic framework where right out of the gate you want to create sort of an atomic layer where everything's joined before we even get to consumers. What I've seen work really well is you drive the integration based off of what the end users want to consume it by. That way you're designing and integrating the most important things that you need for your end consumers, whether it be internal or external customers. So we've created the products, we've got the data products out there. Now we need to look at consumption. And as we all know, from a corporate standpoint, you have more than just one way to consume data. You have all of these applications that are going to consume your products. Different applications have different ways of data consumption, different needs, different paths, different end users. And this is where I've seen a lot in my experience is sometimes the ownership can get blurred as far as when the data products maybe leave their data ecosystem into these new platforms. Sometimes ownership can get squishy. And I will kind of speak to an example that I've seen a lot from the BI and reporting standpoint is, as anyone knows, at an enterprise level, there are multiple enterprise reporting platforms out there. And I am purposely leaving out Excel because it will outlive us all, but I don't consider that a reporting platform. I digress. But between Power BI, QuickSights, Looker, Tableau, these are enterprise platforms for reporting, and each one of them may or may not have a unique way of organizing their data. And if you've ever had to build a report, we all know that it's never just one source system. It's never just one area of clean data. They're probably going to want KPIs. They're probably going to want some derived assets, and they're probably going to want to combine it with multiple areas. So then where does ownership come in? From a report standpoint, if you're going to ask your report developer to not only own the success of the report, the design, the deployment, the maintenance, the performance, but also to be a data SME of that data that it's feeding, you're putting the report developer in a pretty tight spot, and you're asking a lot out of someone who may or may not know all the underpinnings of the underlying data that's supporting. So that's when we're talking about product data ownership extends into those reporting platforms, right? We are platform agnostic. We are, responsible for the success of the data, regardless of what platform is using it. So in this case, as a consumer, I'm responsible for the data in that report. So if there's ever a question or something comes up and someone needs to, know something about it, that report developer, coming back, and I'll touch the importance of lineage, will know that this data came from this product, which is owned by this product team, connect to that product manager. And that way you can have a collaboration. You don't have a single point of failure with this report developer. It becomes a team effort and collaborative effort between the whole product ecosystem. And just to highlight this from an integration example, we'll see this continuous throughout the industry. It happens today. Large corporations aren't vendor locked. You have your data across multiple cloud platforms, whether cloud or on-prem, right? And it doesn't always have to be cloud. You could have multiple BI products. And what happens today a lot is I'm going to import that data into these BI products. So now, not only as a data product owner or data product manager, I have ownership of that data in my cloud data ecosystem. I now have to be responsible for that data in a new BI ecosystem. So again, it comes back to the importance of lineage to be able to track your data and where it is at all time and how it's being consumed is very, very important. So we don't, there's a lot of conversations. Are these separate data products? I've seen both, where once they get into the BI platforms, it's a separate data team. I've also seen the extension of the product owner of the upstream team extends their ownership into the BI platforms. Each company's different. What I've seen kind of work is if you have your lineage up within these platforms, each data product owner is responsible for their piece that supports that report, whether it be source, derived, or consumer aligned. They're responsible for their parts. And if you have lineage set up correctly, you can support and help out those reporting teams on those platforms. Now, more modern technologies which exist today is instead of importing the data over, we push those queries down. And that makes things a lot easier as a product manager from a data standpoint. Is that's one less ecosystem I now have to manage. I'm going to keep that data in place. Now I'm just monitoring and managing the BI platforms, pushing that information down into my data ecosystem so I don't have to worry about multiple platforms. Completely understand that sometimes that's not possible. You have to import for performance or whatever reasons, but just something to keep in mind, what works best for your team. I've seen both work. I see people starting to lean a little more towards keeping the data in place as much as possible, because from a product standpoint, it's not just the ownership, it's also the infrastructure and the security model that you have to have in multiple places. So again, we could spend an entire session on any one of those areas. I did kind of want to, leave you with some considerations, some things to think about as you go on this journey, whether you're just starting, midway through, or very mature along to it. One of the things I've seen be very successful, but also can be kind of challenging to get off the ground, is adopting your existing product framework to your data. It can be kind of a culture change in that if you're new to the journey, you may not have a product team that is ingrained with your data team. Even your data team is very mature, so it could be a new way of thinking about how to organize your data. The nice thing about it is your data team is probably doing a lot of this today. They probably already have a framework in mind. They have a strategy around it. They have a board with all of their body of work. They've prioritized all that work. They probably already have a team around it. By taking this product framework to it, it helps to collaborate and align these managers together to make sure we're not duplicating efforts, to make sure we're not doing redundant work, to make sure that we are aligning on our approach. So when integration does come in, we're all speaking the same page, which kind of leads into federating at that global level. So not only are the product managers aligned on the work itself, but at the larger infrastructure level, if I'm looking at a domain, I don't want to have my product teams be responsible for creating their own infrastructure, automation, and security framework. To scale out, if you can have a dedicated IT team that creates a domain and treats it like an app and deploys it out to your data team, now that data team just has to focus on the design and development of their data. They don't have to worry about the infrastructure and automation. That's handled at the global level. Now, not all data is created equal. You might have different security things that you have to take into consideration. And that's why you hear the phrase, federate globally, interpret locally. I get the global rules, and then for me, I can interpret them locally, but then you also have that governance so you can see how all of these data products are working together, how they're all performing, access, governance, and the highlight just treating data like code, just like anything else. From a boundary standpoint, this is where things I've seen can get very, I don't want to say kind of squishy. This sometimes can be one of the most interesting conversations to have. Boundaries can sometimes be misinterpreted as ownership. And I think, at least in my experience, if you can work with areas to let them know that, hey, it's still your data, you are still responsible for it at a source, but we're going to give you a team who is responsible for the success of it. So maybe decouple those areas of ownership to say, we're going to provide you the support you need to make sure that your data is set up to be successful, but it's still your data. And then when we come to leading into the centricity of like, what are the boundaries? I hate to say it depends, but it really depends. Like there's no wrong answer. I've seen people organize every which way possible. It just what works best for your organization, for your teams. In my opinion, the best way to start is what you already have in place. I wouldn't upend your entire ecosystem just to define these new boundaries. Start with what you already have, rapidly iterate, grow as you go, but just start with your existing boundaries within teams, agree upon where the lines end, and then just go from there. And this kind of leads into the derived and analytics standpoint, especially when you get to master measure tables. Often when we're doing KPIs, it's not just source data. Again, we're blending that data. We're taking multiple assets from multiple source systems to create an analytic model, a derived output. So then the question of who's responsible for the math, who's responsible for that calculation? Is it each team is responsible for their piece, but you have a separate team that's responsible for the overall math? Do you have a dedicated data science team who is responsible for all of it? And then they work with the upstream application teams and source product teams, which is great, but kind of leads into the last point of do not lose innovation in this. A lot of times when we talk about the KPIs and the building and the discovery of them, and even leading into the reporting standpoint, I've seen you have someone do an R&D, create a really cool thing, and then deploy it out. And soon it starts growing and gets more popular, so it has to become a production asset. And then that individual who created that thing stops becoming someone who discovers and someone who builds and turns into someone who does production support. And so I think that can be fine as long as you provide that team with enough people to keep doing R&D, or you provide a system where you, once an analytic product is created that needs production support, can be, I hate to use the term handoff, but a collaboration for even within the same product team, you maybe have an R&D team and you have a production team within the same product group. That way you never lose sight of the innovation piece. So thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak today. Let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next session. Thank you.